Good day to you. I'm Richard Quest of CNN's Quest Means Business and Business Traveller. The retail renaissance that we are looking at and how retailers have not only adapted but will now thrive as the economic boom in many parts of the world gets underway. With me is Sue Toy, the Vice President of Category and Shopper Leadership at Tyson. Sue is a veritable expert and having navigated what happened during the pandemic and the way Tyson had to adapt its distribution chain. Explain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm on the sales side, so I was on calls all day, every day around how we were going to flex supply. It's not my area of expertise, right? Fortunately, because it was a beast, no pun intended. But right, we were trying to find ways every day to get supply out onto the retail shelves, and it meant flipping lines from food service products to retail products where we could, and doing that with speed, which we haven't done in ever. Right, things we were doing that we've never been able to do, we were doing, in a matter of weeks. So things like that, even retailers accepting and being very open to accepting packages that they typically don't sell, so that we could get product on the shelf for and food on people's plates.
The result of this has led to you, to some extent, being classic omnichannel in the way in which your product, fresh meat, is now being distributed online, in store, and the picker for online orders. How does that make it more difficult for you? In the traditional sense, was it easier just to funnel the product down one path and let somebody else worry about all the ultimate destinations?
Yeah, it's interesting because trying to adapt to an additional shopper, which is this picker, is a little unique, but it's also not. And the online shopper, right? Really, at the end of the day, the fundamentals for our function, for insights and for some of the technology we're trying to deploy is similar. It's just a slight different twist, right? So an item has to be on the shelf to sell. So distribution has to be on the virtual shelf or the in-store shelf, right? But things like best in flow in a physical store or the right space in the store is very similar to being first on the first page online. So there's all these little differences, but the fundamentals are the same. Shoppability is another great example, right? We have to understand how people shop online so that our navigation and our search words are connected, right? It's not unsimilar to how we merchandise in store, right? How people shop, how they shop, how they buy is how we set up the physical store. So the picker is that other element, right? Right now, we think making the shelf easy to shop benefits both the traditional shopper and the picker, but we're trying to find ways to partner with retailers on different ways we can help be more efficient without taking away from the shopping experience from the traditional shopper. So the handhelds and all the technology that they're enabling their pickers to be more efficient is certainly helpful, but it's definitely a switch for us.
As the brand, is it more difficult to protect and promote the brand in the store these days or online? The picker will pick judging by what has been ordered. To the extent that the person has choice, where does the brand fit into now this new distribution?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think we talked a little bit about it on our panel, right? The one of the changes in behavior, shopping behavior, is people want to get in and out of that store fast, right? During the pandemic, so people have organized their lists based on the store design. Like like crazy things have happened to get people in and out of the store, which for a branded player, there's no impulse, there's no browsing. For a retailer, right? Both of us. Fortunately, a lot of the brands that we have in the Tyson portfolio are leading in their category. So they're an anchor. So we feel really good about, our brand presence in many of our categories, right? Tyson, Hillshire, Jimmy Dean, they're leaders in their space. So sometimes people just focus on that brand and move on. But online, it's the same thing. It's how to upsell and how to get our innovation out, right? When people are very focused on their list. So it is definitely a challenge that we're working through.
As things return to something approaching normality, in other words, we're going back in the store, the numbers have increased.
Yep.
For yourselves, how much of the changes you made will you keep? Is there a risk of regression back to old ways, silos and the like?
I think always once we get settled into the new normal, then there'll be a settling in that will probably do that. But I think the way that we work with our customers is going to be sticky. I think, especially our function, right? We're trying to find ways to partner with them on SKU optimization. Well, that starts with our supply chain. We have to rationalize SKUs so that our supply can handle what we're trying to push through. So retailers want to make sure they have the exact right items in the store at the right time. So fundamentally, I think it's creating better relationships.
I just want to interrupt you for that. Is that harder for a physical retailer to ensure they have the stock in front on the shelf to delight versus the online retailer or the picker who, you've still got to supply the meat to them, but you're supplying at a much larger level to a more central resource, unless, of course, it's a buy online, pick in store.
Yeah, and that's the majority of that's the future in our head is store as a fulfillment center until at least the foreseeable future. So to your point, as certain items that are unique online, we have to fit them onto a physical shelf because otherwise a picker has to find them, right? So pure plays are a lot different beast, but for the Walmarts and the Krogers of the world and what we have to do there, that physical shelf is the fulfillment center for online. So that's the dilemma because it has to be a good shopping experience, but yet we have to accommodate days of supply and capacity for those items that are fastly selling online and that are unique to online versus in store. So that's the quandary.
This is interesting because since you're fulfilling from a store, the brand and the retailer's experience is pretty similar in the sense that the product has to be in the physical bricks and mortar. So the failure of bricks and mortar to keep up with physical product is one of the challenges because demand is now coming from multiple sources.
Exactly. And I'm not an expert in retail, but if you can imagine, it's just, we went for years and years with trying to have retailers have just-in-time inventory, right? So they, as soon as they run out of stock and fulfill. Well, that kind of broke down in the panic surge and the panic buying during this pandemic. So, we had to pivot. So there is something that they're going to have to figure out as far as supply, but it goes back to the shelf. So how we have to make sure that the demand, the capacity on the shelf can handle core items. So that's why I think that there will be, short term at least, a reduction in assortment or SKU count, right? Because we have to focus on the core SKUs that are selling so that we have enough shelf space to accommodate the demand.
It's funny, you talk about shelf space. I know what you mean, but it is almost an antiquated phrase because I think of shelf space. But you talk about the reality is that online shelf space has the potential for unlimited, but isn't. Whereas physical shelf space is there in front of you and has the same capacity constraints.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, that's where some of the pure plays, have it a little easier, right? Because they, the pick and, the grocery stores that are fulfilling in store, it's one and the same supply demand.
When it comes to the pandemic, it's heading slowly backwards into the distance, we believe, at least in the developed world, in the major economies. What will you take from it, besides vaccination? What will you take from it as being the spirit that you at Tyson learned?
Well, we talked a little bit about agility and speed of insights for sure. But also there's been some sticky behavior that all of us in the industry are going to have to figure out. Well, and I think it's some good sticky behavior, right? And I talked a little bit about it. People have learned how to cook. Millennials kind of had to cook. And I know there's a lot of fatigue. And we talked about, espresso machines and all those kinds of bread. There's been all this kind of crazy talk about what people have done during the pandemic, but that's a behavior that will stick, right? And so that's good for our industry, for the grocery industry for sure. Maybe not as great for the food service industry, which I'm also a part of, because there's that trade-off between making a premium steak that might be an upsell in their shopping trip, but it takes away from a steak that they purchased in a restaurant, right? So there's all of that going on. So the shopping behavior that sticks is most fascinating to me, because we'll have to flex and adapt to it, but that's a big one. And then how people shop is another sticky behavior. So I think it'll be really kind of a fun ride in the next few years. Challenging, but interesting and new.
And we'll talk about it, I hope, in the future. Good to see you.